Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this Friday, May 8th. Today, we will be talking all things kind of what happened this legislative session, kind of the results, what we were happy with, what we oppose, and what is kind of still sitting on the governor's desk. And so every Friday at noon, we go live with environmental topics. And again, today is about the legislative results. So, with that, I will hand it over to Pam Mackey Taylor, our chapter director.
Thank you, Brianna. So, the first thing we'll talk about is the carbon dioxide pipelines. And we were pretty disappointed that nothing passed through the legislature this year. This is the bill that deals with no eminent domain for carbon dioxide pipelines. And it would have said that if a company obtains 100% voluntary easements, the pipeline could be built. Otherwise, they couldn't use eminent domain. The bill passed the House very early in the session, and unfortunately, it was not brought up for debate in this Senate. So, like I said, we're pretty disappointed in this outcome. And then I'm going to move on to the next slide. And that one is about the constitutional amendment requiring a supermajority for income tax increases. Now, this was Bill SJR 11. As I said, it is a constitutional amendment, and because it passed the House this year and it had previously passed the Senate, and it is going to be on the ballot for this upcoming election. And to go into a little more detail about the constitutional amendment, it would require a 2/3 majority of both chambers to increase income taxes or to pass any new tax on income or legal and special reserves. Now, it would require a simple majority to lower income taxes, and it restricts court challenges to 1 year after enactment of laws implementing the income tax changes. The Sierra Club opposed this bill, and as I mentioned, it is going to be on the ballot, and it will be up to the voters to decide if they want to implement this amendment with a yes or reject it with a no vote. The next bill we'll talk about, or the next things we'll talk about, is what happens when the governor receives a bill. Now, the governor has a couple options. She can sign a bill into law, or she can veto it in total. Now, that's true for most bills. For appropriations bills, that would be the allocation of money to the various departments and agencies. The governor also has a line item veto for those individual expenditures. The appropriations bills are the only bills that can be line item vetoed. So as we talk about the next bills, the policy bills, remember that the bill has to be signed in total or vetoed in total. Now let's talk about the next bill. That was a bill that would shield companies from climate change litigation, and that is HF 2527. The governor has already signed this bill into law. What this bill would do is that in any civil or criminal action, the defendant is not liable and is not subject to any judicial remedy under any principle of law or equity for damages or injury from any alleged actual or potential effect on climate change caused wholly or partly by greenhouse gas emissions. And to continue what this does, unless the defendant can show by clear and convincing evidence that avoidable or identifiable damage or injury has resulted or will result as a direct cause of the defendant's violation of an enforceable statutory limitation or restriction or a valid enforceable operating air or other permit issued to the defendant by the regulatory agency. In other words, this would shield the gas companies, the oil companies, for any responsibility they had in creating climate change. It would shield them unless they had a permit issued by the government restricting the emissions of greenhouse gases. and if they violated that permit. So that's a complete and total shield. We were opposed to this legislation. Unfortunately, it's been put in place. This kind of reminds me about some of the shielding that tobacco companies had for years. They were not liable for any injuries, health damages caused by their products. Eventually, that was overturned, and they have had some liability. And unfortunately, right now, the oil and gas companies, the petroleum companies, the fossil fuel industry is going to be shielded in Iowa. Let's move on to the next slide. And this deals with the nuclear power industry. So it's HF 2757 that grants a sales tax exemption for nuclear electric generation facilities. And this is aimed at the Duane Arnold Nuclear Power Plant in Palo, Iowa. The sales tax exemption starts January 1 of 2026, and it ends when the nuclear power plant begins commercial operation. For this exemption, the company would have to give an annual contribution to the Nuclear Energy Workforce Fund of $2,200 per megawatt named capacity. And the fund would be given to the Board of Regents for programs supporting nuclear energy workforce. In other words, setting up a nuclear energy program at Iowa State has been proposed, perhaps some programs at the community colleges. This bill is waiting the governor's signature or veto, and the Sierra Club opposes this bill. Now we have a bill that we supported that we're going to talk about next, and that's the radon mitigation bill. That's HF 2297. And with that bill, state and local building codes would require new single-family and two-family residential homes to have passive radon mitigation. Radon is the leading cause of environmental lung cancer in Iowa. The gas, radon gas, is released when uranium breaks down, and uranium is a natural chemical found in Iowa's soils and rocks. Outdoor levels of radon are low, but radon levels can build up inside a building. 70%, over 70% of Iowa homes are above the Environmental Protection Agency recommended action for needing environmental mitigation, radon mitigation in the homes. And it makes sense to require new residents to have radon mitigation systems already built in. It's cheaper as the home is being built rather than to retrofit it. And so it just makes sense to have that as a requirement. This bill is awaiting the governor's signature. We support this legislation and hope the governor signs it. The next bill is about open meetings. It's HF 2490, and the bill changes requirements for posting notices of public meetings. It requires the posting of a notice of a public meeting in a prominent, conspicuous place visible at all times. It requires posting the notice on the primary internet site operated by the government entity. And it requires marking an agenda as amended if the agenda is changing, and it would also identify the amended provisions. We support this. A lot of our work, environmental work, depends on access to public meetings, public hearings, and so we will find this very, very useful. And therefore, we are supporting the legislation, and we hope the governor signs the bill. Now, the next piece of legislation involves uniform rules. That's SF 2463. Most state agencies will be required to adopt uniform rules for rulemaking, for petitions for rulemaking, for waiver rules, for declarative orders, for contested cases, and for fair information practices. This bill makes the rules fair and consistent across the government agencies. Unfortunately, it does not include the Iowa Utilities Commission processes. Even so, The Sierra Club supports this legislation, and we hope the governor signs the bill. Now, the question is, how do you notify the governor of what you want her to do? And there are two good ways to do that. The governor has a phone, and her phone number is on this slide. It's 515-281-5211. And you can call her office and tell the individual taking notes that you want a bill vetoed or you want a bill signed. And you can also register your opinion on the governor's webpage. The governor does not have a direct email, but if you go to the governor's webpage, governor.iowa.gov/contact-office/governor, you can enter your comments about an individual bill. And then the staff will pick that up and can respond to it. And so with that, I'll take questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pam. The question we have today is, do you know kind of what the deadline for the governor is when those bills hit her desk, or what date she has to sign them or veto them by?
The governor has 30 days after the legislature adjourned. I believe that would mean that everything has to be wrapped up by June 2nd. She has already been taking care of the bills that were passed during the session, during the earlier days of the session. And so there are a number of bills that are remaining that were passed in the last few days of the session. So she has 30 days.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everybody, make sure to go to that website or give Governor Reynolds a call. Let her know if you support or oppose the bills that we talked about today or any other ones that might pique your interest. But thank you so much again, Pam, and have a fantastic Friday, everybody. We'll see you again next Friday.